Powered by NEI Global Relocation. This is Relocation Leader, the podcast where we help advanced professionals in the world of global mobility. Now, here's your host, Zac Turbis.
Welcome to another episode of Relocation Leader. I'm your host, Zac Turbis, and today we have a bonus episode. We're going to be discussing the conflict in the Middle East and sort of the relocation impact on that with President of Interconnex, Alex Talbot. Alex, thanks for joining the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate the opportunity.
All right, Alex. So, this has been in all the news by now. We should all know that, there's a serious conflict happening in Iran, and it's happening near a pretty pivotal trade route, and disruptions are expected. But there may be some things that, we are not fully aware of. So do you want to kind of get us up to speed on sort of some of the broader pictures that relocation managers are trying to deal with right now?
Yeah, obviously, it's this conflict in Iran is in its third week or right around week 3. And it's certainly causing quite an impact on global shipping, including the shipping of household goods. And it's been hectic for the team. Thankfully, I haven't been too directly involved, but I know they're working hard to secure the goods, where they are, or get them to a safe place, and counseling the transferees with kind of and the clients as to what the best options are. But yes, it's a very fluid situation for sure.
Now, when I was doing some initial research, I found these numbers and they kind of shocked me here. So about 10 million barrels of oil per day are taken out of global supply because of this disruption. And about 20% of the world's oil and natural gas supply run through basically like a 21-mile width stretch in the Strait of Hormuz in the Middle East. Can you explain sort of what that means globally in terms of ripple effects?
Yeah, I mean, it's the Strait is certainly impacted, and of course, there's actually some acts of war on various processing plants for the oil itself. But yes, a lot of the world relies on oil from the Middle East, and so it is already causing, we're so far away from it, and we think we're removed, but the price of diesel hit $5 yesterday here in the States, which is the highest I think it's ever been, and certainly or higher than for a very, very long time. But certainly the EU, obviously the airlines and the shipping lines themselves are all paying higher fuel. Our crews, the partners we have around the globe, they're going to pay more to fuel up their trucks right now. So the fuel side of it is going to impact us and our business, and of course, general inflation. Inflationary costs for everything we purchase, but certainly right now, freight is being heavily impacted by the fuel costs.
Can you kind of go into explaining, what is your team doing in terms of how are you preparing to be able to provide, quality service while this major disruption is taking place?
Well, we're relying heavily on our partners for information, real-time information. We get every morning we get different things hitting your inbox. We're also looking online to see what's going on, listening to the news just to see. It's changing every day, right? There's some bit of news coming through. So finding out from that what our options are, what's realistic. Sure, for any price you can get, a shipment out of there via air, but at what cost, and what's ROI on that cost? But really just trying to give people the best options and have them calm down and then be reasonable. As long as you and your loved ones are safe, we will keep your goods safe and provide some options, some reasonable, some not, to get your goods reunited with you once you're leaving that area. And most of the volume right now, initially in the first week or two, it was about people on their way there, right? Because there was people that moved there and their goods were still in transit. So it was a matter of, what do we do if they haven't hit the port? So it really depends on what the airline or steamship line wanted to do. Were they going to the next port? Were they going to hold it on the ship? There's still containers sitting on ships that haven't moved since it started 3 weeks ago.
Yeah. And do you getting down to the actual families who are moving, how does the recommendation change for them now that we are sort of in this conflict?
what are the challenges or what are the changes for them? Or just,
Yeah, yeah. I was just thinking like, what are the recommendations? Like, how do the
oh, okay.
recommendations
Yeah.
change for
All
them?
right. Yeah, absolutely. So at first, we were trying to accommodate, and we still are trying to accommodate getting goods out. Obviously, ocean in that region is pretty much not possible right now. The strait is closed. Ships are not operating in that region. There's, as I mentioned, a lot of ships that are just floating, waiting to find a place to go. So ocean is really not an option. So that leaves you with air and land options. And air freight costs have gone up like at least 5x, if not 10x. The land option is going up because the infrastructure, these highways that we're trying to utilize, have never seen these kind of volumes before. They weren't designed to handle these kind of volumes because of the traditional shipping of ocean being the main option. So uh, we're using these options, but we're seeing increased costs and increased congestion. So really, our counsel, if it's a single person who doesn't have a lot of things and they're trying to fly things out by air, we're saying, look, I know we're here, we're not a not-for-profit organization, but we have to be realistic with your costs, right? If the transferee can take excess baggage on their flight when they leave, please do that, right? A few $100s is probably a great investment versus trying to fly it out via freight. Alternatively, storage. If they can take the essentials they need with them on the flight, put the rest in storage. Wait till the situation dies down. Of course, I don't know how long that's going to be. Nobody does. But that's probably our recommendation is to hold the goods where they are. Have one of our partners pick it up, put it in their warehouse, and store it there until things become reasonable again.
So, I kind of hesitate to ask this, but I think it's pertinent to the conversation. How bad might this get, and what's sort of the strategy if it gets any worse? Is there a leveling off effect where it'll get this bad, but probably not any worse,
Yeah, unprecedented. This little deja vu because this feels like what I was asked 6 years ago right now, right? Because 6 years ago puts us in March of 2020 when the pandemic was still a new word for us in current time, modern times, and things were happening quickly exactly 6 years ago. And this is a little similar to that right now, not on the same scale. And back then, if we were doing this podcast, then I probably wouldn't know the answer then. But I do know what recovery looks like, and I do know that once the crisis ends, it's going to take some time to restore normal services. If you look at what happened in 2020, the world kind of shut down, so we really weren't able to operate, and you had all this pent up demand. You had assignments that were, basically frozen. And then in 21, we had the busiest year our industry has ever seen. 21 and 22. We also had the highest freight costs you've ever seen because what happens as this situation in the Middle East goes on, you're continuing to disrupt the global supply chain, right? These ships that are in that area now, they just don't service that area. They're traveling all over the globe on a set schedule. The steamship lines know the kind of a general flow of their traffic to different ports of call. Now we have this bottleneck, we have this just disruption. So they're going to have to adjust the global schedules as well to deal with these ships that are stuck there and obviously not being able to go through this area. Um, Once again, airlines are being relied on more heavily, so that's going to impact their supply chain globally. For every day that this goes on, it's going to take that much longer to restore the service. But as far as how long this is going to last or how bad it's going to get, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
The energy is a big one, right, in terms of cost. And again, going back to the ROI discussion on moving the goods right now.
And how do you set expectations with clients, given the fact that there's a lot you just don't know? I'm thinking about how where does relocation goods actually fit in with the broader picture of goods and or goods being shipped all over, and sort of like how does that affect relocation broadly speaking?
It's part of the owner philosophy that we embrace as well, right? And part of that is being transparent and setting expectations. And that is very difficult. So the expectation we set is that we really don't know how long it's going to take. Especially if it's so much, like let's say it's a 40-foot container. I can't say it. It really depends on when things stop in the Middle East, and we have no idea when that's going to be. So we just have to be transparent, and our expectation is we'll give you updates on a cadence that you're comfortable with, right? Giving you an update every day probably doesn't make sense, but we can tell you like weekly, perhaps. Every client and every transfer has different needs. Some are like, hey, I'm watching the news every day, so I know what's going on. So when things settle down, call me and we'll schedule my shipment. So it's just being transparent, right? Transparent is the key in this business, and not trying to sugarcoat anything. Also staying calm and getting them to stay calm.
Nice.
Central.
You talked a little bit about rebound. Do you have like with COVID, it was huge impact, not localized to any one area.
Right.
And this, it seems that at least it's definitely more regional or localized to one particular area. Does that mean that we'll rebound a little bit quicker in your mind?
I would think so. I would think
Yeah.
so. It depends on the long-term damage. So again, right, it's the shipping of the oil is disrupted, but there are also, attacks on from multiple sides on the actual process of producing the oil in that region. So that's something we didn't have during, 2021, right? That wasn't an impact. So as far as the shipping itself, yeah, that'll restore, fairly within a few months, I guess. It just really depends on how long it goes for.
Hmm.
And then what people are willing to pay, right? Because there's also going to be, again, those pent-up assignments that are not moving. So it'll be the household goods industry will also experience its own little peak in activity, which will lead to, crew shortages and congestion.
Hmm. And
And
then in terms of, those global mobility managers trying to communicate with their talent, about the situation, what kinds of things should they be thinking about in terms of communication?
first of all, collecting the right information, right? Working with your trusted partners that have been doing this, in our case, since 1969, and just really listening. And also, we've seen in the past couple, in the last first few weeks, of people like really pushing, like just use air freight, whatever it costs, and we're saying that's maybe not the best idea. Are you sure you really want to spend this much and understand that you're used to 2 to 3 weeks for air transit time. It That doesn't apply right now, and we are household goods as an industry is kind of a fourth class citizen in the world of freight, right? We're in the best of times. Household goods shipments are regularly booked from airlines, from commercial flights. They're bumped from sailings, or we call roll to the next container, because there's so many other priorities to global shipping beyond household goods. So just to take our advice, maybe get a couple of opinions if you don't like what your one provider is telling you, and just really look at the ROI. Again, as long as the transfer is safe and the household goods are safe, the rest is really kind of secondary.
Can you explain a little bit about sort of the role of the RMC and then the role of what your team is going through in helping facilitate that communication and that understanding so that clients are kept in the loop?
I think I just had my newsletter go out today. So for us and Interconex, we've been sending. Now I've switched to a weekly cadence because I think I don't want to too many every other day. It doesn't make sense unless there's a big change, obviously. And I think RMCs need to do the same. But my gosh, it's so much more challenging for you because we're just focused on the household goods. Obviously, you have immigration and temporary housing and permits and all these other things that you're focused on. So just the same, like I'm assuming, IDI is relying on my fellow partners, and collecting information and just finding what are the realistic options for what the current goal is of the client with their transferee, which I'm sure is also changing, right? There was assignments, like we were moving plenty of people to that region now, and that was the goal, like they're going to go there for an assignment or a permanent transfer. Those plans are probably changing given the situation there. So it's a
Nice.
matter, okay, so now what's the new goal and how do we achieve that? And what are the options and what are the risks, right? Speaking of risk, if you don't mind me, just, the insurance is a big question. Like, are the goods insured? And yes, they are. They're still insured, but they're not, most of the insurance companies have waived or not waived, but taken out the war risk clause. So if the goods are damaged because the crew dropped something or something got misplaced, that is still covered. But if the goods are damaged due to an action of the war itself, they are not covered. So that's the key thing. I think some clients are saying, not covered in that area. They are covered, just not for the war itself.
Hmm. Yeah. Is there anything that kind of makes you hopeful going forward?
For that, I was asked yesterday by someone how many containers we had impacted by this, and I honestly didn't have the total number.
Hmm.
And so I'm proud of my team. Like I love my team. They win all these awards for us from you guys and others, and um, I have a really seasoned team. And I know this is such a salesy thing to say, but the team, I'm very thankful for my team for navigating us through this, decades of experience with most of them. And then our partners, these partners, the moving and storage companies around the globe, they're really the true heroes here. They're on the front line, literally in some cases right now. It's what we do is not as important in the grand scheme of what's going on in the world right now, but yet we treat it as the most important thing. And so just the communication, the dedication, the creativity, and coming up with solutions are things I'm thankful for.
Yeah. We every once in a while we pull a clip from, something in the past that we've recorded that sort of becomes relevant again. And we pulled one up a week ago, I think, of Molly Ivanchich of when she was talking about, how going through COVID and going through all these different challenges have really sort of impacted how we deal with current challenges. And so, if there's anything to be hopeful about, it's that like, hey, we all know that in the past 5, 6 years, like we've been through a lot, and our ability to handle these things, unfortunately, is actually quite improved,
Yeah.
if you,
Oh,
so
that's very true, right? We got through what happened 6 years ago. We can get through pretty much anything, right? I think we're less of an alarmist society these days, despite what you may see on the media.
yeah, for sure. Well, Alex, I want to thank you again for coming on Relocation Leader to give everyone an update and to just kind of share what you're seeing. And yeah, thank you so
My
much.
pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. Always great to chat with you.
That was another episode of Relocation Leader. I hope that was helpful to everyone, and we will see you back.
This has been Relocation Leader, the podcast where we help advanced professionals in the world of global mobility